The morning sun spread across the wide open fields of Jack Cole's ranch, turning the dry grass golden and peaceful. 4 years, that land had been his pride, passed down through generations, every fence post and tree a memory of his grandfather's hard work. Jack was a simple man, quiet, steady, the kind who worked sunrise to sunset without complaint. The ranch sat far enough from town that he rarely dealt with outsiders, and he liked it that way. His horses grazed freely, his dogs slept by the porch, and the world felt right, until that morning when everything changed. As Jack walked to his mailbox at the end of the dirt road, wiping his hands on his jeans, he noticed a crisp white envelope with a red stamp across it. Official HOA violation notice. He frowned. HOA? There wasn't supposed to be one anywhere near his land. He opened the envelope slowly, scanning the printed words. The letter claimed that part of his property, specifically his barn and fencing, encroached upon HOA zoning territory and violated community landscaping standards. It demanded immediate compliance and payment of a $5,000 fine. Jack stood there in disbelief, his hat shading his eyes from the sun as he read the words again. Encroached, he muttered. This land's been in my family for 80 years. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket, walking back toward the house with a slow, controlled stride. Inside, he placed the letter on his grandfather's old oak table and poured himself a cup of coffee. The clock ticked softly on the wall, but Jack's mind was loud. Who were these people? And why were they claiming authority over his ranch? He picked up the phone and called the number printed at the bottom of the notice. After a few rings, a sharp, confident female voice answered, Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. This is President Karen Holt speaking. Jack kept his tone calm. Yes. This is Jack Cole. I got a letter this morning claiming my ranch is violating your HOA laws. I think there's been a mistake. There was a pause on the line. Then, in a voice dripping with arrogance, she said, Mr. Cole, your property lies within the recently expanded Oak Ridge development boundary. You are now under HOA jurisdiction. Jack frowned. My property line hasn't changed in 80 years. She laughed lightly. Well, the town has changed, Mr. Cole. And it's our job to ensure standards are maintained. You'll need to adjust to the community's expectations. Jack's jaw tightened. I didn't sign up for your community. Then you should have read the annexation notice we mailed months ago, she said coldly. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Jack stayed silent for a long moment before replying, with all due respect, you're barking up the wrong fence. She sighed, annoyed. You have 10 business days to fix the violations or face eviction. Eviction. Jack repeated, the word almost amusing. You're trying to evict me from my own land. From the Oak Ridge community, she corrected. If your property sits inside our boundary, it falls under our control. We'll see about that, Jack said calmly and hung up. He stood by the window, sipping his coffee, staring out at the horizon where his land stretched for miles. Something didn't feel right. How could an HOA suddenly claim ownership over his ranch? He needed to see this for himself. That afternoon, he saddled his old truck, dusted off his hat, and drove toward town. The road was long and empty, lined with old trees that whispered in the wind. When he finally reached the newly built development, he was shocked. The once quiet outskirts had turned into a maze of polished homes, trimmed lawns, and matching mailboxes. Everything looked fake, controlled, like a picture of perfection hiding something rotten underneath. At the far end stood a large building with a shining metal sign, Oak Ridge Homeowners Association headquarters. In front of it stretched a wide parking lot full of expensive cars and freshly painted white lines. Jack parked across the street, looking around quietly. Something about the land felt familiar. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel, and noticed an old oak tree near the corner of the lot. His grandfather had planted the same kind of trees along their boundary lines decades ago. He walked a few more steps and stopped suddenly, his heart beating slower. The fence line that once marked his grandfather's western boundary, he could see it buried under new asphalt. They had paved over his family's land to build their office and parking lot. For a moment, Jack said nothing. He just stood there, watching as people in suits walked in and out of the building like they owned the place. "You built your kingdom on my ground," he whispered to himself, a calm, dangerous tone in his voice. Inside the HOA building, Karen Holt was holding court at the conference table. She was in her 50s, polished and proud, the kind of woman who saw power as a birthright. Her hair was neat, her lipstick perfect, and her smile practiced. She looked up when Jack entered the room. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice sharp but fake sweet. Jack tipped his hat politely. "Jack Cole. Got your letter this morning." Karen's expression shifted slightly, recognizing the name. "Ah, yes. The ranch property. I assume you're here to settle your violations." "I'm here to understand them," he replied evenly. "Because as far as I know, my land doesn't belong to any HOA." She chuckled softly, standing up. "Mr. Cole, the expansion project was approved by the county. The boundaries changed last year. Your ranch is now part of the Oak Ridge community." Jack looked around the fancy office, noticing photos of smiling residents and plaques boasting community awards. "Funny," he said. "My granddad used to lease this land to the town for events. Guess you folks decided to keep it." Karen frowned. "Excuse me." Jack took a slow step closer, his eyes steady on hers. "That parking lot outside, the one with the big oak tree near the corner. My grandfather planted that tree when he marked our western boundary line. You paved right over it." Her lips parted slightly, but she quickly recovered her composure. "I'm sure the county handled all ownership properly. If you have a complaint, you can file it with our legal department." "I'll do that," Jack said, tipping his hat again. "But when I do, you might want to start checking who really owns the ground under your office." Karen forced a smile. "Mr. Cole, I don't take kindly to threats." Jack smiled back faintly. "Good. Because that wasn't one." He turned and walked out, leaving her staring after him. As he stepped outside, he looked around once more, letting the realization settle deep in his chest. They had built their empire, an HOA of arrogance and control, right on top of his family's land. Every step they took, every car that parked in that lot, every meeting they held, it all stood on soil that legally belonged to him. He could have confronted them right then and there, but Jack wasn't impulsive. His grandfather had taught him that revenge was best served cold and quiet. That night, back at the ranch, Jack pulled out the old metal lockbox from the top shelf of his study. Inside were dozens of yellowed documents, property deeds, maps, and letters. He spread them across his desk, tracing the boundary lines with his finger. There it was, in black ink, Cole Family Trust, Land Lease Agreement, 1987. His grandfather had leased part of the land to the county for community development, but the lease had a clause. It automatically reverted to family ownership if payments ever stopped. And by the looks of it, no one had paid a dime in over 30 years. Jack leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming. "Well, Grandpa," he murmured, "they just built their castle on our dirt." The wind howled outside, brushing against the old windows like a whisper of approval. Jack turned off the lamp, staring into the darkness, already planning his next move. He didn't need to threaten the HOA. All he had to do was wait. Because soon enough, they'd realize that the man they tried to evict was the one person who held the ground beneath their feet. And when that day came, Jack Cole wouldn't just take back what was his. He'd make them pay rent for it. Karen Holt prided herself on control. In her mind, Oak Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood, it was her kingdom. Every mailbox color, every blade of grass, every fence height had to meet her approval. She loved the power of her clipboard, the feeling of command when she knocked on someone's door and watched fear flicker in their eyes. To her, HOA authority wasn't just rules, it was personal glory. She had built this system from the ground up, turning what used to be a quiet town edge into a polished, artificial paradise where no one dared to argue. But Jack Cole's arrival changed everything. He wasn't impressed by her titles, her threats, or her tone. He didn't tremble when she raised her voice. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. The morning after their first meeting, she called an emergency HOA session. The board members gathered in the conference room, sipping coffee nervously as she paced back and forth, heels clicking against the polished tile. "We have a problem," she said sharply. "That rancher, Jack Cole, thinks he's above the law. He refuses to comply with HOA regulations." One of the members, a timid man named Brian, raised his hand. "Karen, are we sure his land is even part of the HOA? It's kind of far out." Karen turned on him like a hawk. "The expansion map clearly includes his property. He's part of Oak Ridge now, whether he likes it or not." Another board member, Linda, spoke hesitantly. "But Karen, maybe we should review the county lines first, just to be sure." Karen slammed her clipboard on the table. "Enough. He's in violation, and I won't let one stubborn rancher ruin the image of this community." The room went silent. Everyone knew better than to challenge her when her voice reached that tone. She smoothed her jacket, forcing a smile. "We'll fine him. Then we'll pressure him. If he still doesn't listen, we'll evict him." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to argue. Karen had built her authority on intimidation, and it worked, until now. Meanwhile, across town, Jack sat on his porch, sipping his coffee while his two dogs lay lazily by his feet. He looked calm, but his mind was sharp and busy. In front of him lay the old deed papers, carefully stacked. He had spent the night studying every line, every clause, every boundary. He traced the lines with his finger, smiling faintly when he saw the exact coordinates of the HOA's office and parking lot drawn over his grandfather's land. He didn't rush to act. Instead, he waited, because he knew people like Karen. Loud, proud, and predictable. They always overplayed their hand. That afternoon, Karen sent another notice, this time hand-delivered by an HOA volunteer. The paper claimed that Jack's barn violated aesthetic harmony, and that his fencing was inappropriate for a shared community. Jack read it, chuckled softly, then folded it neatly and pinned it on the barn door like a trophy. The volunteer watched in silence, not daring to argue. "Tell your president I appreciate the paperwork," Jack said casually. "Makes it easier to keep a record." When the volunteer reported back to Karen, she exploded. "He laughed at the notice," she shouted, slamming her hand on the desk. "He's mocking us. I'll make him regret it." She began sending more violations every few days, each one more absurd than the last. Unapproved livestock housing. Noise disturbance due to ranch activity. Unauthorized signage because he had a small coal ranch sign near the gate. Jack didn't react to any of it. He paid no fines, sent no letters. Instead, he took photos, copied every document, and kept everything in a growing file labeled HOA harassment. Karen, frustrated by his silence, began spreading rumors in the neighborhood. "That rancher is trouble," she told residents during her morning walks. "He's refusing to follow community standards. I heard he's being investigated." Most people believed her. She'd spent years teaching them not to question authority. But a few started doubting her, whispering quietly at backyard fences. "He's just a quiet guy," one said. "He doesn't bother anyone." "Yeah," another replied. "Maybe she's picking the wrong fight this time." Back in her office, Karen's obsession grew. She dug through property maps, zoning laws, and tax records, determined to find some technicality to destroy Jack's case. But the more she searched, the more she realized something was off. The old maps didn't line up. The county lease records were missing payments. And the parking lot address didn't show up under HOA ownership. It was blank. Her hands began to sweat as she flipped through file after file. She called the county office, pretending to be making a routine inquiry. "Yes, this is Karen Holt from Oak Ridge HOA, she said sweetly. "Could you confirm the ownership record for parcel number 220-54B? The clerk typed for a moment before replying. "That parcel? It's under the Cole Family Trust." Karen froze. "What?" "Yes, the clerk repeated. "Leased to the town in 1987, reverted back to the Cole Trust after payment default about 30 years ago." The receiver nearly slipped from her hand. Are you sure? Positive. It's public record. Karen hung up slowly, her mind racing. She stood there for a full minute, then whispered, "No, that can't be right." The next day, she called a private lawyer, demanding confirmation. The lawyer's voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Holt, if Mr. Cole's trust owns the land your office sits on, then technically, the HOA is operating on his property without legal right." "So what are you saying?" she snapped. "I'm saying," the lawyer said carefully, "he's your landlord." The line went silent. Karen felt a chill crawl down her spine. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the empty HOA office, her heels echoing against the tile. Every desk, every file, every sign that said Oak Ridge HOA headquarters suddenly felt like a lie. She stepped outside into the parking lot, staring at the ground beneath her feet, and realized for the first time what Jack had meant when he said, "You built your kingdom on my ground." The next morning, she drove past his ranch and saw him repairing his fence, calm as ever, the dogs lying nearby. He looked up, tipped his hat, and smiled faintly before going back to work. That simple gesture burned her more than any insult could. In that moment, Karen Holt, the woman who once ruled with fear, felt something she hadn't felt in years, power slipping away. And she swore to herself she'd get it back, no matter what it took to be. By the end of the week, Oak Ridge buzzed with whispers about the upcoming HOA meeting. Every member had been called in by Karen Holt herself. Rumors spread that she planned to deal with the rancher once and for all. Karen spent the entire night preparing, printing documents, arranging photos, and building a case meant to humiliate Jack Cole in front of the entire board. But while she prepared her storm, Jack prepared something far quieter and far more dangerous. He spent the morning visiting the county office again, gathering certified copies of the land lease, old tax payments, and the 1987 deed that proved his family's ownership. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. When he walked into that meeting, he wanted facts to do the talking. By 6 p.m., the HOA office was packed. Members filled the chairs, murmuring nervously as Karen stood at the head of the room in her gray suit, her smile sharp as a knife. "Let's begin," she said, tapping her pen on the table. "Our first order of business, the continued violations committed by Mr. Jack Cole." She turned as the door opened. Jack stepped inside, calm and composed, holding a worn leather folder under his arm. The room fell silent. Some board members looked at him with pity, others with curiosity. Karen's eyes glimmered with satisfaction. "Mr. Cole," she said sweetly, "thank you for joining us. Please take a seat, though this shouldn't take long." Jack didn't sit. "I'll stand," he said quietly. "Suit yourself," she replied, pretending to be polite. "As you know, the HOA has found multiple violations on your property, including unauthorized fencing, livestock without permit, and refusal to comply with neighborhood design standards. According to policy, you are in breach of community guidelines and subject to eviction proceedings." Her words hung in the air like poison. A few residents whispered among themselves, unsure whether to believe her. Jack waited patiently until she finished, then opened his folder and placed a few papers neatly on the table. "Are you done?" he asked softly. Karen smirked. "Excuse me." "I asked if you're done," he repeated, "because I'd like to present a few documents of my own." The smug expression on her face faltered for a moment, but she crossed her arms confidently. "Go ahead, Mr. Cole." Jack lifted the first page, a certified land deed, yellowed with age but stamped clearly with official seals. "This," he said, "is the property record from 1987. It shows that the land you're currently using for this HOA office and the entire parking lot was leased by my grandfather, Samuel Cole, to the town for community use. That lease expired 30 years ago, and since then, no payments have been made." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen tried to laugh, but her voice cracked slightly. "That's absurd. We bought this land from the county when the office was built." Jack handed her the second page. "No, you didn't. You leased it. And when you stopped paying, ownership automatically reverted back to the Cole family trust, which I now manage." One of the board members, Frank, adjusted his glasses and leaned over the document. "Karen," he said quietly, "this looks real." Karen snatched the paper from him, her face reddening. "This is ridiculous. You expect us to believe you own HOA property." Jack's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge beneath it now. "I don't expect you to believe me. I expect you to read the law." He pulled out one more document, a county certification letter, dated just 3 days ago. He slid it across the table. "That's from the county clerk's office. It confirms the Cole Family Trust as the legal owner of parcels 117 through 121, the exact location of this building and your parking lot." Silence filled the room. Every board member leaned forward, eyes scanning the page. Karen's hands shook slightly as she flipped through it, her confidence crumbling by the second. This has to be a mistake," she said weakly. "It's not," Jack replied. "I checked twice." "Even if that's true," she said quickly, regaining a shred of her composure, "that doesn't change the fact that your ranch is under HOA jurisdiction." Jack tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "You sure about that?" He pulled out one final map, a survey document showing the HOA expansion zone lines. The boundary stopped exactly 300 feet before reaching his ranch. "You've been sending me notices for property you don't even control," he said. "Your HOA never included my land. Every fine, every threat, every violation notice you've sent, they're all invalid." Karen's jaw dropped. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I run this HOA. I know every inch of it." Jack looked at her, his calm eyes cold and steady. "You run what's on my ground, not over it." The room was dead silent. One of the residents in the back coughed awkwardly. Another whispered, "He owns the parking lot." Frank looked up, pale. "Karen, if this is true, we've been trespassing for years." Karen's eyes darted from face to face. "No, this man is lying. He forged these documents." Jack sighed, reached into his folder again, and produced a thick envelope. "Then I suppose the county recorder and the state archive are lying too. These are certified copies from both." He set them on the table one by one, the seals gleaming under the fluorescent light. The room filled with the sound of papers sliding, whispers growing louder. Karen's lips trembled. Her empire, the one she'd built on arrogance and fear, was cracking right in front of her. Jack turned to the board members and said quietly, "I don't want trouble. I don't want revenge. I just want you to know the truth. You've been bullying people on property that isn't even yours." Karen stood up suddenly, slamming her palms against the table. "Enough. This meeting is over," she shouted. "Get out." But no one moved. Even the members she'd ruled over for years stayed seated. For the first time, she saw doubt in their eyes. Jack smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "It's okay. I was leaving anyway." He turned to go, then stopped at the door and looked back at her. "Oh, and Karen? You might want to start saving up. You're about 35 years behind on rent." The entire room went silent again, and for the first time in her reign, Karen Holt had nothing to say. As Jack walked out into the warm evening air, the fading sunlight hit the side of the HOA building, glinting off the metal sign that read Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. He looked at it for a long moment before muttering under his breath, "You built your castle on my dirt." Then he climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove off, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and one queen who had just realized her crown was made of sand. Karen Holt sat alone in her office long after everyone had left the meeting, the papers Jack had placed on the table still spread before her. Her hands trembled as she reread the lines again and again, hoping she'd find some mistake that would save her power. But every seal, every date, every signature was real. He owned it all, the parking lot, the land under the HOA building, even the corner lot they used for storage. The realization burned through her like fire. 4 years, she had bullied residents, fined families, and controlled every inch of Oak Ridge, and now one quiet man had undone it all with a few sheets of paper. Her reflection stared back from the glass window, pale and furious. "No," she whispered to herself. He won't take this from me. I built this. That night, she decided to fight back. By sunrise, the neighborhood was buzzing again with new HOA notices. More aggressive, more personal, and all aimed at one man. Every mailbox in the area had a printed statement signed by her. Mr. Jack Cole is under legal review for fraudulent property claims. Residents are advised not to communicate with him. She even arranged a fake complaint to the local newspaper, trying to paint Jack as a liar who was harassing the HOA. When that didn't work, she called in a private inspector to reassess property lines, hoping to find something, anything, that would make Jack look wrong. But deep down, she knew she was only delaying the inevitable. Meanwhile, Jack remained calm, almost too calm. He woke early, worked his land, fixed his fences, and let the storm swirl around him. The more noise she made, the quieter he became, which somehow made her rage even stronger. Every day, she'd drive past his ranch, hoping to see fear in his face, but all she saw was a man who looked at peace. The calm before the storm. A few days later, Karen stood before the HOA board again, trying to rally support. He's dangerous, she said, slamming her hand on the table. He's trying to destroy this community. We can't let him win. But the board members were tired. Frank, the treasurer, spoke softly. Karen, maybe we should talk to him. If he really owns the property, he doesn't, she snapped. He forged it. He's bluffing. Then why didn't the county deny his claim? Linda asked carefully. Karen's voice rose, shrill and panicked. Because the county's incompetent. He tricked them somehow. She could feel their doubt, see it in their eyes. That terrified her more than Jack's ownership, losing her control over them. We will fight this, she said coldly, straightening her jacket. If the law won't stop him, I will. That evening, Jack was walking his dogs near the edge of his property when a dark SUV pulled up. The window rolled down, and Karen's voice cut through the air. You think you've won? She said, glaring at him. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jack didn't even stop walking. I think I do, he said quietly. A woman who doesn't know when to quit. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. You can keep your little papers and your dusty land deeds. This community listens to me. You're just some old cowboy living in the past. Jack turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes with calm precision. Maybe, but the past has a funny way of owning the present. He kept walking, leaving her shouting behind him. That night, Karen made her next move. She called the local police station and filed a complaint, claiming Jack had threatened her. He told me he'd make me pay, she said dramatically, faking tears. The officer sighed, clearly familiar with her antics. Do you have proof? Proof, she snapped. He's a dangerous man. Isn't that enough? The officer's tone turned cold. No, it isn't. Furious, she hung up, pacing the length of her kitchen, muttering to herself. If the law won't help, I'll handle it myself. The next morning, when Jack opened his gate, he found tire marks carved deep into the dirt road, trash thrown across his driveway, and a sign nailed to his fence, "Fraud lives here." He stared at it for a moment, sighed, and pulled it down. He didn't call the police. He didn't confront her. Instead, he took a photo and saved it. Every act of harassment went into a thick file marked evidence. He knew this was the beginning of her downfall, not his. Across town, Karen was unraveling. The HOA members stopped returning her calls. The local paper ignored her letters. And worse, the residents she once controlled began to whisper openly about her behavior. She's losing it, one man said to another as they watched her storm down the street. She's obsessed with that rancher. Maybe he's right, the other replied quietly. Maybe she really built on his land. By the end of the week, the pressure had cracked her composure completely. She called an emergency press meeting. Standing on the steps of the HOA office, reporters gathered around. Her voice shook with anger as she shouted, "This man, Jack Cole, is trying to destroy this community. He's spreading lies about our land, about me." A reporter interrupted, holding up a document. Mrs. Holt, county records confirm his ownership. How do you respond to that? The crowd fell silent. Karen froze, her face draining of color. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment her empire began to crumble. That's false information, she stammered. We'll fight it in court. But no one believed her anymore. The next day, Jack received an email from the county confirming that the HOA had been officially notified of their unpaid lease and pending eviction order. He smiled, sitting back in his chair. The trap was finally closing. While Karen screamed to the press, he filed his next set of papers, a notice of doubled rent and a demand for back payments dating decades. It was legal, airtight, and devastating. When the HOA received the invoice, panic erupted. Board members called each other frantically. Frank resigned immediately, leaving a short note that read, "We built on land that wasn't ours. I won't stay for the fallout." Karen tried to call him, but he ignored her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of isolation. Even her most loyal followers had vanished. That evening, as she sat alone in the dark HOA office, the lights flickered. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the glass. On her desk lay a fresh envelope, hand-delivered, unsigned. Her shaking fingers tore it open. Inside was a single sentence in clean handwriting, "Final notice, 7 days to vacate the property or face full eviction." No signature, no threats, just fact. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew who sent it. Jack Cole wasn't a man of empty words. She looked out the window at the parking lot, where she used to stand proudly and greet residents. Now, it felt different, like it belonged to someone else. Because it did. In that moment, for the first time in her life, Karen Holt felt truly powerless. The ground beneath her wasn't hers anymore. It never was. The next morning began with chaos. The HOA office doors were locked, reporters stood outside, and Karen Holt's name was plastered across the local headlines. HOA built on wrong land, owner files for back rent after 30 years. News vans lined the streets, capturing footage of the once proud Oak Ridge president hiding behind drawn blinds. Inside, Karen sat surrounded by papers, her hair a mess, her coffee cold, her hands shaking as she scrolled through online comments that called her a fraud, a bully, and a thief. Everything she built was falling apart faster than she could control it. But she wasn't done fighting yet. That same afternoon, she stormed into her lawyer's office with red eyes and trembling fury. "I want to sue him," she shouted. "I want to drag Jack Cole into court and destroy him." Her lawyer, a calm man with years of experience, looked over his glasses. "Mrs. Holt, I've reviewed the documents. He's within his rights. If you go to court, you'll lose." "Then make him lose," she snapped. "You're the lawyer, aren't you?" He sighed, closing the file slowly. "Karen, listen to me. The county verified the lease. He's the legal owner. You've been using his land for 3 decades without paying a cent. You're lucky he's only demanding back rent and not pressing criminal charges." Her face twisted with rage. "I am the HOA president. I built this community. He can't just walk in and take it from me." The lawyer looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "He's not taking it from you. You never owned it." She slammed her hand on his desk and stormed out, her heels clacking like gunshots on the tile floor. Across town, Jack was quietly preparing his next move. He wasn't gloating or celebrating. Instead, he spent the morning meeting with his own attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Clara, who specialized in property law. "You've got them cornered," she said, flipping through the stack of papers he'd brought. This lease was airtight. They stopped paying in 1993. You're entitled to everything: back rent, legal fees, even interest. Jack nodded slowly. "I don't want to ruin anyone," he said. "But they tried to take my land. They threatened me. I just want justice." Clara smiled faintly. "Justice is exactly what you're about to get." That afternoon, she filed the official claim in county court, demanding full payment of 30 years' rent plus penalties. Within hours, the news broke again: HOA faces eviction and massive debt, owner files claim for $2.4 million. The entire town turned against Karen overnight. Former board members went on record saying they'd been misled. Residents signed petitions demanding her resignation. Even her closest allies avoided her calls. She sat alone in her kitchen that night, staring at her reflection in the dark window, whispering, "This can't be happening." But it was. The next morning, she walked into the HOA office to find movers already inside, sent by the county to seize assets in response to the lawsuit. The desks, computers, even the framed awards on the wall were being boxed up. "You can't do this," she screamed, grabbing one of the movers by the arm. "This is private property." A calm voice answered from behind her. "Not anymore." She turned and saw Jack standing in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. The movers stepped aside instinctively as the two faced each other for the first time since the meeting. "You think this makes you the hero?" Karen hissed. "You're destroying an entire community." Jack's eyes stayed steady. "No, Karen. You destroyed it when you forgot what it means to have neighbors instead of subjects." "You can't evict me," she said desperately. "You'll regret this." Jack stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Regret doesn't come from doing what's right. It comes from ignoring it for too long." She glared at him, breathing hard, but he could see fear behind her anger now. "You can't do this," she repeated weakly. Jack held up a single paper, the official court order, stamped and sealed. "It's already done." The sound of tape sealing boxes filled the silence as movers continued their work. Karen watched helplessly as years of her control vanished into cardboard. Her office, once a symbol of her power, was now just an empty shell. Outside, residents had gathered to watch. Some whispered, others recorded with their phones. When Jack stepped out, a few even clapped quietly. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. Relief that the woman who had ruled them through fear was finally facing consequences. That evening, the town council held an emergency session to discuss the future of Oakridge. Jack attended, sitting quietly at the back as the councilman read the findings aloud. Effective immediately, the Oakridge HOA is suspended pending investigation. All properties within its boundaries will operate independently until further notice. A wave of applause followed, mixed with murmurs of disbelief. Karen, sitting across the room, looked small, defeated. Her shoulders slumped as the weight of everything she'd lost sank in. But Jack wasn't done. The next day, he had a new notice posted at the entrance of the HOA parking lot. A large wooden sign with simple black letters, "Private property, leased operations suspended. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed." The HOA members arrived one by one, staring at the sign in silence. Some laughed softly. Others shook their heads. Karen just stood there, staring at the words, her face pale as chalk. She tried to tear the sign down herself, but the bolts were too strong. Her hands bled from the effort. When she turned around, Jack was standing behind her. "You can't stop this," he said quietly. "It's already written in law." Her voice broke as she whispered, "You ruined me." "No," Jack replied, stepping past her. "You ruined yourself when you thought power made you untouchable." Then he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving her alone in the parking lot that wasn't hers anymore. Days later, the official court ruling arrived, property ownership confirmed under the Cole Family Trust. HOA ordered to pay restitution and vacate within 5 days. The story spread everywhere, local radio, social media, even state news. Jack's quiet victory became a legend of its own, a reminder that arrogance built on stolen ground never lasts. Meanwhile, Karen locked herself inside her house, ignoring calls, ignoring letters, watching from behind curtains as the world moved on without her. Every night, she'd see headlights from Jack's truck passing by on the road, and her stomach would twist with humiliation and regret. Because no matter what happened next, she knew one truth would haunt her forever. Every meeting she held, every fine she wrote, every speech she gave, had taken place on land that never belonged to her. And now, it belonged once again to the man she tried to destroy. The morning of the eviction arrived with an eerie silence that wrapped around Oak Ridge like a heavy fog. The sun had barely risen when the county sheriff's trucks rolled into the neighborhood, their engines low and steady, carrying official papers that would finally end the reign of Karen Holt. Residents peeked from behind curtains, whispering to each other as words spread fast. Today was the day the HOA office would fall. At exactly 9 a.m., the sheriff stepped out, tall and calm, holding a clipboard in his gloved hand. Behind him came 2 deputies and a moving crew. The words "court-ordered eviction" were written boldly across the papers. Karen's car was already parked outside, her hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes red from sleepless nights. When she saw the sheriff approach, she stepped out, dressed neatly as if trying to keep her dignity intact. "You can't do this," she said sharply, voice trembling. "This property belongs to Oak Ridge." The sheriff looked at her calmly. "Not anymore. The documents are clear. You've been operating on private property. You're required to vacate immediately." Her lips trembled. "There must be some mistake. I built this place." "Maybe you did," the sheriff said quietly, "but you built it on someone else's ground." She stared at him, stunned, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Behind her, movers began carrying out boxes, computers, and files from the HOA office. The sound of tape ripping and furniture being dragged echoed through the air. Residents gathered in small groups on the sidewalks, some holding their phones to record, others just watching in silence. Jack's truck appeared moments later, slowly pulling up near the entrance. He stepped out, calm as ever, wearing his old hat and a simple denim jacket. His presence drew every eye in the crowd. Karen's face went pale as he walked toward her, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound she could hear. "You," she whispered bitterly. "You did this to me." Jack stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "No, Karen," he said softly. "You did this to yourself." "You think this makes you better than me?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You humiliated me, destroyed everything I worked for." Jack looked at the now empty office behind her, then back at her. "You destroyed people, Karen. You fined old couples for flowers. You threatened single mothers for fences. You made good folks live in fear. You didn't build a community, you built a cage." Her face twisted with anger, but her eyes glistened with tears she tried to hide. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll see. This isn't over." Jack's tone stayed steady. "It's been over for a long time. You just refuse to see it." The sheriff cleared his throat, holding out a final document. "Mrs. Holt, you're trespassing. You have 10 minutes to collect personal belongings and leave the premises." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with trembling hands, she took the paper, her eyes scanning the words that confirmed what she already knew. It was finished. She turned away, walking slowly into the office one last time. Inside, the walls were bare, the shelves empty. The golden plaque that once read Oak Ridge HOA headquarters had been removed. All that was left was the faint outline of where it had hung for years. She touched the wall gently, whispering to herself, "This was mine," her voice cracked. Outside, the crowd had grown larger. Some people clapped quietly when she emerged, others just watched with unreadable expressions. A few even felt pity. She carried one small box of her personal things, old files, a nameplate, and a photo of her standing proudly in front of the building during the grand opening. That picture now felt like a memory from another life. As she walked past Jack, she paused, her face hard but her voice soft. "You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything." Jack's eyes softened slightly. "You're wrong," he said. "I understand better than you think. My family lost everything once too. The difference is, we didn't take it from others to get it back." She didn't reply. She just looked away, climbed into her car, and drove off slowly, the crowd parting as she passed. The sheriff watched until her car disappeared around the corner, then turned to Jack. "It's done," he said simply, handing him a copy of the eviction report. Jack nodded, signing it quietly. The deputies loaded the last box into a truck, and soon the lot was empty. Only the wind moved through the space, carrying away the last echoes of the HOA's rule. Jack stood for a while, looking at the land that had caused so much trouble. Now, it was peaceful again. The parking lot stretched under the morning sun, silent except for the rustle of leaves. He walked slowly across the asphalt, stopping near the big oak tree at the corner, the same one his grandfather had planted decades ago. He placed his hand against the trunk, feeling the rough bark. "You've seen a lot, old friend," he murmured. "But it's finally over." Behind him, some of the residents approached hesitantly. "Mr. Cole," one of them said, a middle-aged woman holding her son's hand. "I just wanted to say thank you. For standing up to her. For all of us." Jack turned, offering a small smile. "You don't owe me thanks. You just deserve to live without fear." She nodded, eyes misty. Another man spoke up. "What'll happen to this place now?" Jack looked back at the building, its doors wide open, sunlight spilling through. "Something better," he said quietly. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Jack alone with the wind and the fading sound of moving trucks. For the first time in months, the air felt clean, no tension, no arrogance, no fear. Just peace. That night, the Oak Ridge office stood empty, the lights turned off for good. The sign out front had been taken down, leaving only 2 holes where it once stood. On the desk inside, someone had left a single piece of paper, a copy of the eviction order. Across the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Owner, Jack Cole, Cole Family Trust." The story had come full circle. The land was back where it belonged. The next morning, the news confirmed what everyone already knew. Oak Ridge HOA was officially dissolved. Jack read the headline quietly over his coffee, then folded the newspaper and looked out across his fields. The wind blew gently through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of freedom. He took a deep breath, smiled faintly, and said to himself, "Grandpa, I think we finally got our land back." And somewhere, deep in the earth beneath his feet, the land that had been stolen finally rested, free again, under the care of the man who truly owned it. Weeks passed since the eviction, and the once feared Oak Ridge HOA office now stood quiet, its empty parking lot slowly filling with the sound of life again. The land, once used for control and greed, had found a new purpose. Jack Cole didn't rebuild the office. Instead, he transformed the place into something that truly belonged to the people. A farmer's market and open community space where families could gather freely. Every Saturday morning, the lot buzzed with laughter, the smell of grilled food, and the sound of children running where HOA members once parked their shiny cars. The old sign that used to read Oak Ridge HOA headquarters had been replaced by a wooden board carved by hand, Cole Commons, open to all. It wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about freedom. Jack moved slowly among the stalls, helping vendors set up, greeting old neighbors who once feared speaking to him because of Karen's rules. Now they smiled, shook his hand, and thanked him. "You saved this place," one woman told him, handing him a basket of fresh apples. Jack smiled softly. "No, he said. "I just gave it back." The people respected him, not because he won, but because he never let anger control him. He didn't gloat, didn't humiliate anyone. He just fixed what was broken. But even peace had its ghosts. One late evening, as Jack locked up the market gate, he noticed a small envelope slipped under the wooden sign. The handwriting on the front was neat but shaky. He opened it carefully, reading the short message inside. "I was wrong. Power blinded me. You gave this place what I never could. Peace. Maybe someday I'll find my own. Karen." Jack stood silently for a long time, the wind rustling around him, carrying the faint smell of rain. He folded the letter gently and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Took you long enough," he murmured with a sad smile. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't need to. Some lessons in life came too late, but at least she'd learned hers. Over the following months, Oak Ridge changed in ways no one had imagined. Without the HOA's grip, people started helping each other instead of reporting each other. Neighbors painted their houses whatever color they liked, planted gardens full of bright flowers, and built fences that fit their hearts, not a rulebook. The laughter that once felt dangerous now echoed freely through the streets. One morning, a little boy pointed to the big oak tree near the edge of the market and asked, "Mr. Cole, who planted that?" Jack smiled, resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "My grandfather," he said. "A long time ago. He said trees grow strong when they're given space, not control." The boy grinned. "Like people?" Jack nodded. "Exactly like people." As the years went by, Cole Commons became a landmark, a symbol of what happens when arrogance meets truth, when greed faces patience. People from nearby towns came to visit, curious about the man who once owned the ground beneath an entire HOA and turned it into a place for everyone. Jack never told the story to show off. He told it to remind others. "Power doesn't make you right," he'd say. "But the truth always stands, no matter how deep you try to bury it." On the one-year anniversary of the HOA's fall, the townspeople gathered for a small celebration. The market lights twinkled under the sunset, music played softly, and laughter filled the air. Jack stood quietly near the oak tree, watching it all with calm pride. A young reporter approached him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Cole," she asked, "what was the hardest part of it all?" Jack looked around, the smiling faces, the rebuilt community, the peace that had replaced fear, and replied slowly, waiting. "Watching people forget what kindness looked like. But the best part." He smiled faintly. "Seeing them remember." The reporter nodded, moved by his words, and thanked him. As the night grew darker, lanterns lit up the sky, floating gently upward like glowing fireflies. Children clapped and pointed as their lights disappeared into the stars. Jack stayed a little longer, leaning against the oak tree, the bark rough beneath his hand. He thought about his grandfather, about the lessons he'd passed down. Patience, justice, respect for the land. He thought about Karen too, hoping she had found peace somewhere far away. Then, with a deep breath, he whispered into the cool night air, "It's finally home again." The wind stirred the leaves above him, as if answering back. Jack turned off the last light, locked the gate, and walked down the quiet dirt road toward his ranch. The moon shone bright over the fields, reflecting off the fences and barns like silver threads. Everything was calm. Everything was his once more. And as he disappeared into the distance, the sign behind him, "Cole Commons, open to all," stood tall under the stars, a silent reminder that justice, once planted deep in the soil of truth, never stops growing.